the concept of just being friends, and they understand the concept of making a promise to someone and that you keep that promise when you are doing the treaties. Here's something that I do with kindergarten, grade 1 students, younger kids, is that we create a classroom treaty so that the kids understand that a treaty involves some negotiation. You have to hash out some of the terms of the agreement that you're going to make with each other here. So this is a really good starting point if you're working with a group of kids here, and they do understand. You have to spend a lot of time here thinking about, okay, what is a treaty? You have to prompt the students to understand, you know, that when you make a promise, what does that promise look like? What are the kinds of things that we would promise each other in a classroom here? And the promises are made by the students, but they're also made by the teacher or the instructor. So they both have things that they're negotiating together here. So you have to start off by talking about what is a treaty, what does it mean, why is it important? Why is it important to make a classroom treaty? Obviously, so that we all can work together here in peace and friendship, right? Then there's also who would make a classroom treaty? Well, pretty much anybody who's working in a classroom or a classroom setting of sorts here. What are some of the school rules? And this is where you can really figure out what it is that the students should be doing if they are on task, if they're working, if they're getting along with each other. And you can incorporate classroom rules, or I guess in your instance it would be daycare rules, you know, things that are out of safety or things that would show respect for the other person that's in that group. So you can enforce some of your rules, and what's important for learning, making a list and using words like promise, respect, quiet, share. So when I do this in a classroom, I would list all of these words here, so that when it comes time to actually doing the treaties, we can actually borrow some of those words that are written down there on the word wall, so that they know how to spell it, but they also recognize what that word is and what it means. And what does it look like, sound like, feel like? And so if you use a sort of a Y chart here, what does working together look like? Well, people are in their own spaces, they're not touching each other, and so on. What does it sound like? Well, you hear people are asking, using please and thank you, you know, and what does it feel like? And you can incorporate these rules here, or this treaty, the treaty lists of promises here. You can incorporate outdoor activities too, as well. So not just focus on what you do in the classroom, but outside of the classroom as well. So this is what a couple of photos of what I would do here in the classroom here. So I've already got these pre-made. These are on, I printed these on magnetic sheets so that they stick to the boards. And we can use them in different ways here. And talk about we're all treaty people. These are the words that we use. And we included some positive things like fun, celebrate, best. And then we came up with our list here. So working with the students here, this particular group, this was grade 1, they all decided that the students were going to listen to everyone, share our toys, our ideas, our supplies. We're going to be nice and gentle. We're going to keep our hands to ourselves. We're going to try our best. We're going to be quiet when we are learning. We're going to have respect for others and ourselves and all living things. So they all agreed on this. They all put this all together. This is their own words here. Then we also spent time here with the teacher, made a list of promises as well. So she promised to have, to reward the students when things were going well and there was things to celebrate, that she'd try to make learning fun, that she would try and make sure that she helps everybody who needs help. And so she also had a list of things that she promised as well. Then we went through the process here of the kids signing it. So we made it very official, and that the kids actually signed that so they could see it when it was on the wall that they had promised to do these things. And then we finished it with a handshake. Now, back when the treaties were done here, that whole process here, at that time, 1871 was the first treaty that was signed. A lot of the First Nations chiefs didn't even know how to write in English. So a lot of them would put symbols according to the clan that they belonged to, because we have a clan system in First Nations people here. And I'm from the Lynx clan. So we have people who are from the Bear clan and so on. So they would actually draw the little animals on there because of them not knowing how to write in English at that time. And so at the end of that, they would have a pipe ceremony. So the pipe ceremony is more First Nations people. It's a tradition of when you smoke the pipe, the smoke from that pipe travels up to the Creator. So the agreement, according to First Nations people, was not just the agreement between the First Nations group and the Crown, which is the government. It was also between First Nations, the Crown, and then the Creator. So it was a three-way agreement that was made. And there's a lot of information here, or there's a lot of opportunities for you to learn more about the pipe and the significance of the pipe. You'll notice that on the logo, when I show you the website, there is a pipe right in the center of the TRCM logo. And it's got a lot of symbolism in it. So you see the kids are signing here. Then you can talk about peace and the relationship between the two groups of people. I have a couple of different things that I do with the students here as well at this age level here, is that on the TRCM website, you're going to see that there's some visuals that you can actually download and copy here, where you would have pictures of, this is a commissioner for the Crown, and then this would be a First Nations chief. So there's photos and things like that. So when I'm working in classroom here, I'll sometimes have students work, and they would talk about what that conversation would be between these two here when they were negotiating the treaties here. I've also done things called friendship quilts or treaty quilts, and I'll show you pictures of that. So you're basically focusing on the relationship here, the symbolism of that handshake, what it means to be a friend. That's really what you're starting out with. So that handshake and peace. These are pictures here of one of the activities. Is actually in the teacher's guide here, which you probably won't have access to unless you were to take the training here. But you can still use this idea here. You don't really need the formal lesson plan for this. Is that the students at the end of all of them are talking about promises and friendship and handshakes, is that they do what we do, we're all treaty people kind of quilt for the bulletin board. And so I would have students here who would trace their handprints, or you can use paint onto colored cardstock or construction paper, and then on that square piece of construction paper, they could write their name, depending on how much language they have, or they could write a word like friendship or peace, some of the words that you've already talked about in your treaty that you negotiated in the classroom. Or they might put, we're all treaty people. Everyone write that down here. Depending on what you have access to. In this case here, this was done with paint. When I go in the classroom, I don't have as much time with the students, so they would trace it on white paper and cut their handprint out. And then they would put that on the cardstock. And then we take all of those squares and put them on a bulletin board with the caption, "We're all treaty people." So they get the understanding that everybody's handprint that's there is part of that treaty, the history of the treaties. And this is what this particular group looked like. This is, I think, grade 1 and 2, these students here. So it went on to a bulletin board afterwards. Then you're going to get into sharing and symbols of the treaties. One of the symbols of the treaties happens to be these treaty medals. When the treaties were signed and negotiated, it started off in, well, there was treaties for a very long time around the Niagara region here, but the numbered treaties here is what we're focusing in on for Manitoba. When the numbered treaties were done, the chiefs would receive a medal that they could hang around, and the medals were about this large. Okay, so this is actually just a replica of what that looked like. So this treaty medal here shows you on here, you've got the commissioner and then you've got the First Nations chief, but there's a lot of symbols in here that you could take a look at here. Now this can be found on the actual website, so if you wanted to print copies of this on maybe cardstock and then maybe even laminate it so that the kids can take a look at that on a larger scale, you'll know and identify all of the symbols in here. Because on this treaty medal here, not only do you have these two people here who are standing and shaking hands, but you have a bunch of symbols in here about the treaty, what the landscape looked like. There's a sun in here, there's an axe. What's the meaning of the axe? Well, a lot of First Nations chiefs or people believe that that axe was that they were sharing the land as far as that axe goes. So they were not sharing anything that was below that, meaning the water and the minerals that were underneath there. You'll also see teepees in the background to symbolize that this is land that First Nations people lived on. You're also going to see that there's, in the colored version here, you can print color as well, is that there's grass and then there's water. So the whole idea is that treaties are going to last forever as long as the grass grows, the rivers flow, and the sun shines. All three things. So that's the treaty medal itself here. So in grade 1, you're talking about I'm a treaty person, the symbols of the treaties. Those are the main things that you're talking about as you get older. And even though this might not apply to some of your young, really young students here, they can still understand symbols and what they represent here. You also could, at some point here, use this information to help your own children when they're starting to talk about the history of First Nations people here. So the friendship here, more into the friendship, and then you're starting to introduce newcomers. Who are the newcomers? The settlers, the people that were not here originally. So these are terms that we would use for people who are coming here and settling. Today we tend to use the newcomers, the word newcomers, people who are new to this country, and we also use the word settlers, those who settled here long time ago. And part of the treaty negotiations, the purpose of that was to actually open up space so the newcomers and the settlers could come in and establish a home somewhere in Canada. And so they were settling, they were building farms, they were establishing, they were sort of planting their roots in different areas of Canada here. There's a treaty medal itself right up here. So there is a spot on the website where you can find more information about that treaty medal. One thing you'll notice is that it has Indian treaty. The word Indian is a word that was used, is still used in the United States a lot to describe Indigenous people here. But the word Indian is part of the Indian Act, so you'll still hear it. And the story goes that when Columbus landed in 1492 in North America, he was actually setting out to find India and believing that these people that he had met when he landed here were Indians. And so that word has stuck. Right now, it's not a very kind word because we get a lot of stereotypes and images around using that word Indian. So we tend to use First Nations if we're talking about that group, or we'll tend to use Métis or Inuit depending on who it is. If you really don't know what to use when you're making reference to these first people, then just go to the Indigenous, and that will cover all three groups here. But there's no reason to be embarrassed to ask someone. You know, are you Indigenous? Are you First Nations? Are you Inuit? Are you Métis? And people would be happy to share that with you. So don't be embarrassed about asking questions here about it. You're not being disrespectful. But I would caution you against using the word Indian, okay, for that reason. We tend to call ourselves that sometimes in a joking way. At the bottom here, the medal has 187. And because the number of treaties, there's a real rush to sign those treaties because at the time, MacDonald wanted to build a railroad right across to BC. And so there was an urgency to sign those treaties here so that they could take that space and build that railroad. So they left, they knew they were going to be doing all these negotiations here, so they left that last number blank here so they could just punch in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 9. So that's why you'll see that there's a missing number there. This is the logo that I talked to you about. It has a lot of symbolism in it as well. This is the TRCM logo. There's the eagle, which is at the end of this pipe here. And there's smoke coming out of that eagle's head here. The eagle is the bird that represents the teaching of love in our Ojibwe communities. And because the eagle is the bird that flies the highest, is closest to the Creator. So the eagle is very symbolic and very important to First Nations people here. And so you'll see in this here, it's got the smoke that's traveling up to the Creator. It also has ribbons here of 4 colors. 4 colors representing the 4 races. The black people, the white people, the Asian people, yellow, and then First Nations, red. So those are the 4 colors, right? And it also represents 4 colors of the medicine wheel. There's a lot of information and a lot of teachings around the medicine wheel. And so you might want to explore that at some point here. The medicine wheel is very interesting as it represents the 4 seasons, it represents the 4 elements, it represents the 4 aspects of being, the mind, body, heart, and spirit. So there's a lot of teachings around the medicine wheel. It also has in here the Canadian maple leaf here. It has the land, it has the rivers in here as well. So it represents a lot of what the treaties are all about here. Is the sharing of the land, the water, and the resources here, and then the message that goes to the Creator. So that's there, and there's information on the website here as well about the TRCM logo. And this is what Treaty 3-1 would look like. There's an entire section of the Manitoba Museum dedicated to treaties. If you ever visit the Manitoba Museum, and you'll actually see some of the medals that are there, and then some of the clothing that was offered. See, when they negotiated the treaties, the Crown promised not just to give the First Nations communities a certain amount of land per family, but they also promised them things like clothing for the chiefs. They promised them farming equipment. They promised $5 a year as an annuity that was negotiated. And we still get that $5 every year. And they also promised to share the land with each other. But a lot of those promises have not been met today. So you might hear in the news here about some social issues around the whole signing of the treaties and why the government has not fulfilled their promises as far as the treaties are concerned. So that's why you see in the city here, there's a lot of areas like the Capion Barracks, who is now being turned over to First Nations people because the Crown did not honor the amount of land that was supposed to be given to them. And so they agreed that at some point, if something opens up in other areas, that they would give them that particular land. So the Capion Barracks is now owned by a number of First Nations groups here, and it will be developing into a reserve land, and it'll have businesses and so on. So that's part of the treaties, promises. So the treaty medal here, just to point out, in case you're using the medal as part of a teaching tool here, is that there's at least 6 images on here. The circle, first of all, a lot of people don't realize that the fact that this is a circle, the circle represents a lot of things in First Nations cultures here as far as the circle of life here. When we have sharing circles, we sit in a circle here so that everybody is equal and you can see each other. The circle represents everything that rotates, like the earth rotates in circles here. Even the nests of birds are in circles. So the circle is a very, very, very important symbol. That's part of that treaty metal here, even though you might not think of it because you're looking at the pictures that are on there here, but the circle itself is important. Then there's also the handshake. The fact that the two of them are on that metal shaking hands is important, and that they're both standing facing each other and they're both at the same level is also an important thing to recognize, is that they are seeing each other as being partners and equals when they're facing each other. And there's also the hatchet, like I told you, that hatchet. There's also a term called bury the hatchet. That term means that we're going to get rid of all of the bad stuff in the past and we're going to start fresh. It's burying the hatchet. Or also, the hatchet also symbolizes that we're going to share as far as that hatchet goes in the land. Then there's also the symbol of the teepees in the background to represent that this is the land, traditional land of the First Nations people, and that they live there and they will continue to live there. Then there's the water, the sun, and the grass. And the phrase that goes with that is that the treaties will last forever, as long as the water flows, the sun shines, and the grass grows. Treaties are forever. The other thing that you'll see on there is the commissioner and the chief. The commissioner was simply a representative of the crown, and then the chief represented their particular First Nations group. Now, when Treaty 1 was signed in Lower Fort Garry, that group of First Nations people was not just one particular group, but there were several of them. There were thousands of people that gathered right outside the gates of where Lower Fort Garry is and negotiated over a course of 3 or 4 days here. The chiefs would meet with the commissioners or the crown representatives, and they would talk about what they were going to share. And then the chiefs would go back and tell the community. And so they always negotiated with the community, not just the chief himself. Now, we also have available at the office, you might be able to, at some point here, actually call the Treaty Commission office and get copies of these medals or copies of the logo. There's also a logo about the same size as that one as part of the kit. So those are good teaching tools to have on hand. And if you're not able to actually get them, then you can actually print them off the website. It wouldn't be a difficult thing to do. Right? So if you are going out and doing some practicums and you want to incorporate treaty education into it, I would suggest that you have a few of these on hand here so you can do some small group teaching with the kids here, and then you can have those available to you whenever you needed them, or share them with each other as well. So the things that some of the older kids would probably be more focused in on is things like the pipe itself. And if you are going to do any teachings about the pipe, the Treaty Relation Commission has elders on their speakers bureau that can come in and talk about the pipe ceremony. It should be done by an elder because the pipe is very sacred, and so it should not be taught by anybody but somebody who actually carries a pipe and can share that information with you, right? When you get into grade 2, you're starting to talk about the pipe here, and you're also starting to talk about the treaties in Manitoba, where they were signed, what years they were signed, what was negotiated, who received what when they negotiated those treaties here. So here's an option for an activity too that you might want to incorporate if you're dealing with older children, and some of you might be in an instance where you have some after-school program kids and stuff that are a little older. It's very easy to create a template here for a vest. Some of you might be sewers, and something that you could make is a template for a vest, and you can copy that and trace that onto paper, and then the kids can make a treaty vest. what you would have on there would be different symbols. It could be handshakes, it could be flowers, like beadwork, that kind of thing. Here, I'll show you what some of the students did, and so that you have an idea. So it's really, you just need that template and stencils. A lot of the flower shapes that I used for the treaty vests were just from Dollarama. You buy these foam shapes, and then you do some tracing of them on the vests themselves, right? Pencils and markers. On the teacher's guide, this is a black line master. They do have some pictures of different flower patterns. And so some of the patterns for beadwork here, many of these patterns for beadwork here are all based on flowers. And there's a lot of information about Métis beadwork versus First Nations beadwork. When you're doing this, if you're making a vest, you can take that shape of the flower, but you have the students do dots with markers, so it looks like it's beadwork. And so that's what I've done with students here. And this is what it would look like. All I did is I created one that fit onto a 11 by 14, or is it 11 by 17 inch, the large paper that goes in the photocopier. Yeah, that's all I did with this one here, because I don't have as much time to actually do tracing of big ones. But I do have patterns for the bigger ones too that I've used with teachers. So then they got these patterns here. These ones I photocopied and cut out. And so they were traced, a lot of these patterns on here, these flower patterns. You might want to include animals as well. So some of the animals are the 7 teaching animals here. If you Googled 7 teachings, you'll find out that we've got the buffalo represents respect, the eagle is love, the wolf is humility, and so forth. So you've got 7 animals that you might want to include on the vest as well. Then you're getting into the words newcomer and respect. The more you start using these words, the more familiar you'll get and the more comfortable you'll be in using these words. In the teacher guides here and part of the social studies curriculum, because all of this links into social studies from kindergarten right through grade 12, is that you're going to use terms like newcomers. So that becomes familiar to people here and you start using that. And all that does is represent those people who are new to the country. I'm going to pass that. And then the words First Nations. First Nations here is, again, that big umbrella term here that represents the people who are here originally here, who speak those languages, like Mohawk if you're in Montreal. You've got the Mi'kmaq people in New Brunswick. You've got the Cree and Ojibwe here in Manitoba, and then you've got the Haida people. Like, they've all got different names and different groups of people speaking different languages. The cultures are not all the same. There are some similarities between the groups here. For example, if you're going to talk about the 7 teachings, that is Ojibwe. Although lots and lots of schools and school divisions are using that as their character education for their school. They're using the 7 teachings as a guideline and teaching about respect and love and courage. There's other practices that are common to both groups, like smudging, for example. Smudging is a ceremony, we don't have a religion, this is all part of our culture here, but smudging is a ceremony that's done very commonly amongst all groups across Canada. And I know a lot of religions and a lot of cultures have similar things, smudging, using incense or using medicines as well in some of their ceremonies and in some of the churches as well, because I know the Catholic, I was raised Catholic. Here we have the incense too that we burn. So when you get into grade 3, then you're starting to use the maps. And there's a large map that's on the website here. I'm not sure if you'll ever get to the point where you're actually going into more detail about who these First Nations people are, where the communities are in Manitoba, and the names of the communities. But you might at some point here. Available at our office is this large map here. And this large map here, this shows you all of Manitoba. And you'll see that Treaty 1 is a particular color in here. Treaty 2 is another color, 3, 4, and 5 here. And so all these are all color coded. If you're if you happen to be working with older students here, this is where about grade 3 is about when you're starting to learn about how to use a map and how to use the scale at the bottom of the map as well. What this means here, this is called the legend on the side, and how to read this. You see these dots are different colors. That means the languages. So the red dots are all the Cree-speaking communities in there. And then you've got different colors for the other groups as well. On this particular treaty map here, then you have a list of all the treaties, Treaty 1, and the names of the communities that signed Treaty 1. And then Treaty 2, and so forth. Now, a lot of this information here is probably something that you're not even familiar with, because not a lot of students take Native Studies in high school. Not a lot of students were learning this stuff here. And so this might be brand new stuff for you as well. So it doesn't hurt for you to learn all of this as well, and I'll show you some information on the websites that you can access. But you might want to write this down here, is that this here is an interactive map. And by interactive map, it's MFNERC, mfnerc.org/community-map. If you go to that website, you'll get that interactive map, meaning that you can click on particular names of communities and a video will pop up where the elder will tell you how to pronounce that name and what it means. It's a really, really interesting website, and it allows for a lot of opportunities for not only you to learn this, but also the kids that you might be working with, even your own children here, to learn about for example, my community is up in here, and it's Pinemuntang. Now, what does Pinemuntang mean? Well, I would click on that on the interactive map here, and the video pops up, and it tells us how to pronounce that name, because they're very long. The words are very long. Pinemuntang, what it means, and then how to pronounce that. So it does that for all of the communities across Manitoba. And it's very interesting to learn how to pronounce these. And there's a lot of people that kind of don't understand why the words are so long. It's because English is a noun-based language. So we have a name for all things. This is a table, that's a laptop, that's a chair. First Nations people have, their language is more adjective verb based, in that it describes what it's used for. So it's not a case of it just being a single word to represent the table. It might be a sentence, a small sentence that says, you know, surface with legs. So that's why you're getting these long, long words here, because it's not a noun-based language like English is. So that explains the length of some of the names. So you might have a place like Sagin that means that when you translate it to English, it means where the rivers meet. So that's why the word is long, where the rivers meet. This is something that's part of, it's on the website here. It talks about the different treaties and when they're signed. It's not really difficult to remember this here because they follow in sequence here, except for the first two. So the first treaty was signed in 1871. It included all these communities, and we call them communities. Peguis, Broken Head, Long Plain, Saging, Sandy Bay. And then Treaty 2 was signed a very short time after in 1871, and then they follow in sequence. So Treaty 3, 1873, Treaty 4, 1874, Treaty 5, 1875. So it follows in sequence. So it's a little easier to remember it that way. If you phone the Treaty Commission office, their phone number is 777-1871. The signing of the first treaty. Easy to remember that number, right? and some of these here, this word adhesion means that these are communities that could not be there when they signed that particular treaty, but they were part of that at a later date. Now, there's an activity in the teacher guide here, and there's an activity that involves a map here. But I think maybe, well, I'll see if we have time for it. But an activity that you might want to include if you are using the map at some point here is to use that map of Manitoba with all of the treaties and communities on it here and give students a list of places to find. And what I've done here is I've created a treaty kit. I'll show you what it looks like here, where I've taken that map and I've cut it into pieces. And then I laminated it. So it's like a puzzle. So I've taken this big map and I put in a puzzle, and they have to put it together. I tell you, the kids are probably better at it than adults. Adults have a little bit more of a struggle, particularly if you've not traveled up north.
Yeah.
And you're not familiar with the names of these places. But it's a great activity and something that you might want to add to sort of your list of ideas of stuff that you might use at a later date here, is to create a treaty map bingo. So the first step would be to take that map, to cut it into pieces. I cut it into smaller pieces because I have a small laminator. So I cut it into pieces that would go through the laminator, and I laminated the pieces. You can also get the entire map laminated. So I cut it into about 13, 14, 15 different pieces here. And then I also purchased bingo chips. And those bingo chips are part of what you would do if you had this list here, is that you would have the students, kind of looks like this, you would have the students put bingo chips on the list of places. So it would be a bit of a challenge for them, because some of them may not know. They'll probably know where Winnipeg is, but they may not know where Dauphin is or the Pas, these different places here in Manitoba. And so they put the bingo chips on that. If the students are a little older, then there's a piece of string in there so that I can teach them how to use the scale in the map that's at the bottom to figure out the distance from Winnipeg, say, to the Pas. So they can measure that, and they learn how to use a little bit of math. So you incorporate some math into that as well. So not only are you doing social studies, but you're also doing a bit of math as well. And for the students, when I'm working with them in the classroom, I tend to do them with about groups of 3 or 4. It seemed to work well as far as cooperating with each other here. So this is what it would look like in a classroom here. The kids are putting the map pieces together here.
So you had to print that off in one big one, though, to cut it out?
I did it 2 different ways. Is that, first of all, I went to a printing place on, I think it's on Provencher, but you can get it done at Staples as well. I printed up the whole map and then cut it up. But the other way I did it also was I took an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardboard and I flipped the map over and I cut out, I traced, so they could fit through a small laminator.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, depends on the size of your laminator. But then I created all of these kits, so I've got several of them that I use when I go into the classroom. And bingo chips, you can buy them from this novelty store on St. James across from Artist Emporium. Bingo chips are not that easy to get anymore. People use dabbers, right? They play bingo. But you could use anything else that you might have. They might have math stuff at one of the teachers' stores. You know, little coins and stuff.
Or pennies, because they're obsolete now.
I know. Can't win, eh?
Yeah.
If you start using money, it's going to disappear pretty quick.
Oh, I guess so.
You can also, as an activity, is to actually cut or trace circles and cut them out, and the kids can actually copy the metal. So they can, and there's actually Blackline Masters on the website here, where you can print out the picture of the commissioner and the chief on there, and then cut a circle around it and make copies of that for the kids. That might be a little bit easier for some of the younger kids who feel like they can't draw. You know, that you've already given them that, and then all they have to do is fill in the background and color it. It makes it a little easier for those who are a little younger, and then also those who have a little trouble with the drawing part. So, and I've also extended this here. On this one side, the other side of this one here, you'll see that if I was to flip that over, they had the treaty the commissioner and the First Nations treaty medal represented, but on the back they drew pictures about their own culture as well. So it's something that represents their culture, who they are. Then there's that concept of we're all treaty people, which is an important one as well. Just wanted to review this with you, just in case you don't know and kids ask you questions here. Why did they sign these treaties? Well, during the 1870s, there was a period where the buffalo numbers, the numbers of buffalo were dying out. There was a lot of disease that was being brought over from Europe. So large numbers of First Nations people here died or were struggling or starving. And so they knew they had to do something. The First Nations people also, the fur trade was declining. So that was a really good source of income. They would trade their furs for things like pots and pans and ammunition and flour and beads and so on. So the fur trade was dying out. They also had here their traditional way of life was changing here. And so they needed somehow to think about future generations. What's going to happen to our kids and our kids' kids? So they needed to do something as far as forming a treaty or making an agreement with the settlers that were coming in. The Crown here, they wanted to open up the West to European immigrants here so that they could establish their own communities and their own farms. They wanted to build a railroad from Ontario to BC. They were also afraid that the United States was going to encroach and take over that whole area of part of Canada. So they needed to establish that this was Canada. We negotiated, and here's the border between US and Canada. Because at that time there was a lot of Indian wars going on, there was a lot of things that were happening, and so this whole chunk of Canada here was really not settled. And so there was a fear that the US was going to move in. Had that happened, then we would have been part of the United States right now, and we would have Donald Trump as our president. Scary thought, eh? So yeah, so there's a lot of reasons for both of them wanting to and needing to negotiate these treaties in a very quick manner. Another activity that might be of use to you and is to take the things that were negotiated. Again, you can find that on the website, and they sort them. The Crown received this, First Nations received that. So it's just a sorting activity. Of course, you need a little bit of language in order to do that, right? And understanding of the treaties. So here's what I basically, when I go in a classroom, I want to make sure that we know who negotiated the treaties, what was negotiated, where were they negotiated, when did this happen, and why? What were the reasons behind that? So just basically covering the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why. Now, there's a book series here called Turtle Island Voices by Pearson Canada that might be of interest to you, because these ones work with the smart words very nicely. So this one here called The Great Flood is talking about the creation story. And that's part of the treaty kit too. There's a creation story here. It talks about the floods that occurred and how this became Turtle Island and how the animals were involved in that. And almost every culture has some form of a creation story. And funny enough, but a lot of them have a flood in them. Is that a mistake? No. Is that coincidence? I don't think so. I visited the National Museum in New York City, and there's evidence that there's been 2 floods before our existence, physical evidence. Okay, there's your websites. Treaty Relation Commission, trcm.ca. First Nations Resource Center. This is the group, MF-NERC, who takes care of the schools on reserves. They handle all the schools for the reserves, okay? And then there's also Manitoba Education has documents as well. And then there's also the treaty. This treaty commission in Saskatchewan has a lot of resources as well. They were the first ones to establish a commission for treaty education here prior to Manitoba. So we modeled a lot of what we do with them. Now, a lot of our activities too are available in French. Let's see. There's a commission right there, the commission website. I'm going to draw your attention to one thing here before I finish up here. Is this one called Public Education? That's where the Speakers Bureau is. So if you were to click on that, you'll see a list of about 20 people that can come and visit for no cost. There's no cost at all. If you want to bring an elder in, no cost. And every one of them has a description of that person. So I'm on that list, and it will tell you that this person is an elder from certain area, Treaty 1 or Treaty 2, Treaty 3, and it'll say that this person here will go in and do classroom supports. This one will talk about different things, right? So you've got lots of choices there. Treaty education here, this is the one that you'll probably use the most under treaty education here, is that it's got the backgrounder. Oh, just click on that so that you see it. Because I only have a few minutes left here, so you'll have to do some exploring on your own. And it might not be a bad idea to go and spend a half hour and go through this and take a look at it, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there that might help you with assignments. So you've got all about treaty education here. Here's how it links to social studies. The teacher's portal has all of the teaching activities in it. And then there's a lot of other stuff here, like there's webinars that might be of interest to you, training when it's posted in here. But if you clicked on the teacher's portal, you're going to have a lot of lists of things here. You've got French resources, maps are here. There's a newspaper thing here. There's PowerPoints that are already made for you that you can use in the classroom. You've got teacher support materials, different puzzles and games that might be of interest to you. So there's lots to explore here in the teacher's portal. And I suggest too, when people are brand new to this, is that you take a look at some of the PowerPoints that are here. And this is basically just introduces the treaties here. You can get it in PDF or PowerPoint. If you get it in PowerPoint form, then you can expand and add slides to it. So that's a really cool thing about that one there. That's for grades 3 to 6, but I use it for younger kids as well. So it looks like, I wonder if it's going to pop up.
Just click open at the bottom there.
Oh, I see. That's why it's not opening it.
So, interesting process.
Yeah, I didn't notice that.
Try clicking the PowerPoint icon at the bottom. It might have opened in PowerPoint already.
Yeah, there it is. So this is basically what a basic PowerPoint would look like. You've got different slides here that shows the First Nations people here, alliances, treaties, what they are, making a treaty, a picture here, what it would look like. So it's basically just several slides here that you can expand on. You could make one slide into like 2 or 3 slides. So it is something that you might want to explore as far as resources here. And let's close that off there. So that's on the website under Teacher Portal. So I think that's pretty much it. Just one point in here is that it's really never too, the kids are never too young to start this whole process here of understanding and about diversity and cultures and talking about their own culture here, First Nations cultures here, because we have such a diverse population here in Canada here. It's important that we learn to respect each other's cultures here and have an understanding that we all have our own different cultures and that are important to each one of us. So you see here, this is likely just a daycare, and he's already he's dressed in his regalia, and he's doing a little presentation about his regalia probably and when he uses it and so on. So sharing that information with each other is really helpful, and it helps broaden, you know, the knowledge of your students or the kids that you're working with. So I think I've got that just after 10 here.
Yes,
So it's
and are
gonna
we
be
able to
great.
have a few questions if they have?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. So, we don't need the video on, I don't think, for the questions. We're good there. Maybe they'll feel more
Unless
comfortable
somebody
asking, right? And can they see you?
Thank you.